there is a possibility that Aleister Crowley is among the most fascinating individuals who have ever lived. In addition to being a scholar, a writer, and a magician, he also claimed to be a secret agent. Due to the fact that some people think that he was the Antichrist, as described in the Book of Revelation, he was referred to as the Great Beast 666. Others are of the opinion that he was a brilliant and visionary individual, and that the world would be a different place if it were not for the lessons that he taught. Aleister Crowley was born in Warwickshire, England, in the year 1875 under the influence of two parents who were deeply religious. In spite of the fact that his grandfather owned a prosperous distillery business, his father never wanted to spend any of the money because he held the belief that intoxication was a socially unacceptable behavior. Instead, he decided to pursue a career as a preacher and fervently spread the doctrines of a fundamentalist Christian group known as the Plymouth Brethren. Young Edward was instructed by them to live his life in the most uncomplicated manner possible and to understand that the sole purpose of humanity was to serve God. Any sort of success, whether it was spending money, dressed in nice clothes, or eating more than was absolutely necessary, was regarded as a sin, and the temptation to indulge in anything was seen as the work of the devil. This included spending money, dressing in nice clothes, and dressing in nice clothing. Edward desired to follow in his father's footsteps and become a preacher when he was a very small child. He also looked up to his father. He complied with all of his parents' demands, and instead of going outside to play with the other children, he turned his attention to studying the Bible. You can probably guess that this did not make him a very popular boy at school, and as a result, he was subjected to cruel bullying from the other children. When he was only 11 years old, his father passed away from tongue cancer, and he was left in the care of his obsessive mother. Edward became quite ill as a result of the terrible conditions that he was forced to endure on a regular basis. If nothing was done to improve his condition, the doctors predicted that he would pass away in a matter of months because he was so frail. He was fortunate to have his uncle intervene and make the suggestion that perhaps the young man should relocate to a more rural village. Edward moved in with his uncle and immediately began climbing mountains and running through the forest, where he was able to take in the revitalizing air. Up until that moment, the idea that his uncle would provide him with the opportunity to enjoy himself was something that he had never experienced before. Even took him to drunken establishments and allowed him to consume alcohol while underage, and paid for a prostitute so that he might lose his virginity while he was only 15 years old. After all, the doctors had warned him that he might pass away in the near future, and his uncle wanted him to make the most of the time he had left by having as much fun as he possibly could. His health had completely improved, and he was returned to his mother's house to continue living there. However, Edward had undergone a transformation during his absence, and he was now engaged in full-blown teenage rebellion. As a result of his awareness that the Plymouth Brethren were to blame for his poor childhood, he decided to reject all of the religious teachings that they had to offer. The idea of being a preacher was no longer appealing to him, and he desired the autonomy to make his own decisions regarding his life. The concept that almost anything that brought joy to people was regarded as a sin was something that he detested completely. It came as a surprise to his mother that her faithful son had undergone such a significant transformation during his absence, and she concluded that he had become the beast described in the Book of Revelation. After having a disagreement with her, he came to the conclusion that if he needed to commune with the devil in order to live his life according to his own rules, then so be it. In spite of his mother's disapproval, he had sexual relations with the maid while he was sleeping on her bed. This was one of the first dirty things he did. He would go on to become the beast that his mother described. After she learned the truth, she promptly terminated the maid's employment, and the unfortunate young lady's reputation was tarnished to the point where she was unable to continue working. Crowley asserted that the maid was Jack the Ripper's first victim because she was coerced into engaging in prostitution. He went so far as to claim that he was personally acquainted with Jack the Ripper and that he was a cultist. In later years, he would write about the years that shaped him. At that moment, I was grappling with my own mortality. God and Satan engaged in a battle for my soul. God triumphed over those 3 hours of labor. I have only one more question at this point. To which of the two was God referred? After graduating from high school, Crowley was sent away to Cambridge, where he announced himself to his new classmates as Aleister Crowley. He was a student at Cambridge University. He became a member of the chess club and went on to claim victory in a number of events. In the year 1898, Aleister was 22 years old at the time. He fell in love with Herbert Jerome Pollitt, a classmate of his who was also his friend. There were only a handful of people in the school who were aware of Herbert's alter persona, which consisted of him dressing up as Diane de Regime and going to private nightclubs. There are love poems that Crowley composed about her. This is in addition to the fact that they are overwhelmed with agony regarding his desire to be with him. Therefore, it is evident that his homosexuality served as an additional impetus for him to abandon Christianity in the eyes of the Church. His passion for Herbert was regarded as a sexual perversion by others around him. After completing his education, Aleister was able to finally pursue his goals because he had inherited the wealth that had been passed down through the Crowley family. He started hiring female prostitutes on a virtually daily basis, and he also started purchasing books on the occult world. He was in the process of creating sleazy poetry and releasing it under a pseudonym in other countries. It was not until he was in his early 20s that he realized he was not the only one who was fascinated by the occult and the notion that magic could actually exist. He becomes a member of a group of aspiring wizards known as the Order of the Golden Dawn. Notable individuals who were members of this society included Bram Stoker, the creator of Dracula, and the poet William Butler Yeats. They claimed that they had translated ancient Egyptian manuscripts, which resulted in Grimm being loaded with Jewish mysticism from the Kabbalah, as well as ancient magic. They were under the impression that they were able to do genuine magic, speak with angels, and learn about the soul and beyond. When Crowley arrived at his first meeting of the Order of the Golden Dawn, he was disguised as advisor Vladimir Suarez and introduced himself to the group. He was wearing a disguise. Due to the fact that he did not wish to have his name ruined, he continued to be concerned that his family would discover that he was engaging in experiments with the occult. However, due to the fact that he was a young man with a baby face, he wore a fake mustache, and he spoke with a poor Russian accent, no one was convinced by his outfit. Due to the fact that he asserted that he had successfully infiltrated a secret society, Aleister Crowley went on to become a covert spy for the British government during World War I. This occurred later in his life. Now, technically speaking, that is correct, but the outcome of his career as a spy was probably more likely to be something along the lines of the Pink Panther. Instead of accepting James Bond's offer, he felt at ease with the knowledge that the Golden Dawn place a high priority on protecting individuals' privacy. Crowley disclosed his genuine identity to the audience. The unfortunate reality is that it has already gotten things off to a poor start, and some members of the group found it difficult to trust him. Crowley took their lectures very seriously, and as a result, he was able to quickly go through the classes, despite the fact that he had been caught off guard at the beginning. It was important to the Golden Dawn that its new members had the opportunity to connect with their inner selves before they were instructed in the art of magic. A significant amount of time was spent talking about mantras, yoga, meditation, and philosophy in order to achieve this goal. They would have their dreams and daily journals written down, and then they would analyze what those dreams said about who they were as individuals. On the other hand, there were certain spells that they cast on a daily basis because they had a firm belief that they could call upon angels to assist them. In the pentagram, the ritual of minor banishment is performed in the following manner. In the name of God, the God of Israel, I pray that Michael will be my right hands this day. Over to my left is Gabriel. Ariel came before me. In the rear of me and above my head is Raphael. God's presence in the world. It is very clear that I have such a strong faith in the supernatural that he asserts that these were the preliminary steps of a magical voyage that would bring him into contact with his guardian angel. In an open and honest manner, he expressed his wish to invoke the ancient gods and demon people. He employed psychedelic substances as part of his routines because he was under the impression that they heightened the intensity of his spiritual experiences. There was genuine anxiety among the other members of the Golden Dawn regarding all of this. A good many of them were aristocrats who did not drink alcohol and who believed that his ideas were far-fetched, if not outright dangerous. Due to the fact that Crowley was obviously engaged in some form of dark magic, the members of the society did not want him to advance in the ranks of the organization. Their belief was that he would employ his abilities for nefarious purposes. However, he was able to persuade one of the members to teach him higher levels of spells in exchange for free rent. In his books, Mr. Crowley nonchalantly recalls walking out on his remains while he was levitating. This was despite the fact that there was a severe rule that prohibited anyone from paying another person to teach magic. In the year 1899, when Mr. Crowley was only 24 years old, he purchased a mansion on the shores of Loch Ness in Scotland called Boleskine House. He did this solely for the purpose of performing a spell known as the Abramelin ritual, as if this were quite common among the members of the Golden Dawn. The reality, however, was that nothing took place. Despite his best efforts, he was never able to see any angels or devils in his visions. It would appear that he became dissatisfied with the fact that he was performing this ritual each and every day without observing any outcomes, and as a result, he decided to engage in a different activity. The fact that he did not complete the rite was said to have opened the doors of hell, according to the rumors that circulated. The property that Crowley had on Loch Ness was eventually purchased by Jimmy Page, the lead guitarist for Led Zeppelin, many years later. He asserts that the mansion was in fact haunted by the demons that descended from Crowley. For the first time, Aleister Crowley wed a woman who went by the name of Rose Edith Kelly. At the time of their encounter, she was a young widow who was engaged to a man whom her parents had selected for her relationship. He was successful in persuading her to run away with him instead. Despite the fact that they had only known each other for a single day, they decided to go on a honeymoon to Egypt together on the spur of the moment. This was done so that he could prevent her from engaging into this particular arranged marriage. Crowley led Rose into a cave that was completely dark, and then he began to recite his spells. Go to the Lesser Key of Solomon was the title of the book that he was reading excerpts from. In order to accomplish this, he was supposed to call upon Horus, the deity of Egypt. When Roses abruptly fell back, he took advantage of the opportunity afforded to him. It is her assertion that at that very moment, she experienced a vision and heard the voice of Horus. Rose was causing Crowley a great deal of frustration because he believed that she was playing a joke on him. In spite of the fact that he had spent years learning about the occult and making attempts to call upon gods and demons, he had never seen either of them in any of his visions. His mind simply could not wrap itself around the idea that Rose could conjure up Horus even when she was not making any effort to do so. However, she continued to claim that she had seen something in the caves and that the gods had been furious with him up until that point because of his arrogance. He continued to be out of step and not believe in the gods, and he took her to one of the museums and asked her to point out the gods that she had seen. Immediately, Rose approached the accurate image of Horus that was displayed in exhibit number 666. Once they were in possession of this evidence, they made a hasty return to their residence in Cairo so that they could discuss the visions in discreet settings. Rose claimed that Horus had instructed her on how to contact with the spirits and that she had received guidance from him. She provided Bannister with the spiritual rite that he was to carry out. He was able to hear the voice of his guardian angel whispering over his shoulder when he had finished what he was doing. The angel gave him permission to jot down a great deal of knowledge over the course of 3 days, and he subsequently published this information in a book that was referred to as the Book of the Law. It is said that do what you will, and you will be the whole of the law. This is the most famous quote. Simply put, this means that you are free to act however you like with your own life. Crowley was overjoyed by this information, and upon his return to England, he informed all of his friends in the Golden Dawn about the voices that he and Rose had heard while they were in Egypt. Many people were hesitant to trust him, and some of them were outraged because they thought he had been deceived into truly talking with a demon rather than a guardian angel. As of this moment, they continued to maintain their stance of not granting Crowley permission to advance to the subsequent level of the secret society. MacGregor Matthies, the leader of the parish chapter of the Golden Dawn, was the person he went to see on his visit. When he returned to London with a certificate from Mathieson in his possession, he narrated the incident that had occurred back in London, and Martha appeared to concur with him that Crowley was certainly deserving of advancement to the next level. Despite the fact that the other members continued to refuse to welcome him, he managed to sneak into the clubhouse and secretly replace the locks. The following day, he laughed at the men since they were unable to enter the building. After that, he was officially expelled from the Golden Dawn, which should not come as a surprise. Unless Crowley took grievous pals climbing on Catherine Jonga, which is one of the largest and most hazardous mountains in the world, they reached 25,000 feet a year later, in 1905. This was the case even if they tried to climb on Catherine Jonga. However, one of the men on the trip, a photographer by the name of Jules Jacko Gizmo, was enraged by the manner in which Crowley was treating the other members of the team, and he desired to take control of the expedition. Crowley and the other members of the expedition, who believed that he was acting recklessly, engaged in heated debates throughout the journey. In the end, they rebelled against Crowley's authority, and the other climbers made their way back down the mountain as the setting sun neared. Despite the fact that Crowley had warned that it was potentially hazardous. Consequently, an accident occurred that resulted in the deaths of several porters, and the mountaineering world placed a great deal of responsibility on Crowley for this incident. During that same instant, it was asserted that Crowley sat inside his tent and attempted to manipulate someone, specifically a demon. On the mountain, an avalanche came crashing down. They cried for assistance, but Crowley paid no attention to them, and he abandoned them where they were. After some time had passed, he remarked that he had no sympathy whatsoever for the sad accident, despite the fact that a significant number of the guys had miraculously survived. After the passing of their first daughter, who was only 2 years old at the time, Aleister Crowley's marriage to Rose came to an end. It was obvious that they were no longer in love with one another, despite the fact that they created a second daughter together and named her Lola Zarza. As a result, Rose experienced a severe depression. The divorce was granted in 1909 on the grounds that he had committed adultery, and just 2 years later he was forced to place her in an asylum due to the neurological damage she had sustained as a result of her drinking. Because the majority of people who even sought to have a personal relationship with Crowley ended up having their lives completely ruined, this was a pattern that tended to occur because it was a situation that could be compared to a chicken or egg scenario. His belief in the occult may have been responsible for attracting people with mental instability into his life, or perhaps his wickedness was sufficient to drive people insane. Due to the fact that Crowley did not have a strong desire to become a parent, he entrusted the care of his daughter to boarding schools and nannies. He established his own educational institution, which he called Thelema, and taught the Book of the Law as if it were equivalent to the Bible. Using a home in Italy that he referred to as the Abbey of Thelema, he established a community of people. Each and every person who resided there was encouraged to engage in whatever activities they desired whenever they desired. He or she used drugs. In addition, children were seen naked and running about the grounds as they were having orgies together. The villa contained a number of rooms, one of which was referred to as the Nightmare Room. In this room, Crowley painted horrifying imagery on the walls. He advised others who followed him to take LSD and stare at the terrifying sights until they completely lost all fear of anything. It came as a surprise to the neighbors. In addition, the people continue to assert that the location is afflicted with a curse even to this very day. It is said that the ceremonies became increasingly intense, to the point where they even participated in bestiality and animal sacrifice. This is according to a rumor. One of Astor's lovers, a lady named Lair, experienced a nervous breakdown as a result of this, and she went directly to the British press after she reported that one of the followers had died as a result of consuming the blood of a cat. Upon arrival, the Italian authorities compelled the party to leave the residence and subsequently prohibited them from ever returning to the location. People continue to believe that the Abbey of Thelema is haunted, despite the fact that it has been abandoned completely up until this very day. Mr. Crowley traveled to the United States in order to disseminate his message, and he was responsible for motivating a number of individuals to engage in the practice of the occult. These individuals included the rocket scientist Jack Parsons and Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology. They were instructed on how to conduct sex magic, which was the notion that their goals could be heard by the cosmos during the moment of orgasm. He explained them how to execute sex magic. Fortunately for Crowley, all of the drugs and sex ultimately caught up with him. These things eventually caught up with him, due to the fact that he had lost a significant amount of weight in the 1930s. Mr. Crowley was referred to as a black magician by a journalist. He eventually became a full-blown heroin addict. Following a number of years of managing cults and purchasing real estate in various parts of the world, his inheritance would eventually run out. He was living by himself in a boarding home, and he was doing everything in his power to satisfy his cravings and maintain his life. Despite the fact that he had referred to himself as a magician and the beast in his own books, he made the decision to file a lawsuit against the journalist for libel. Due to the fact that he was unsuccessful in the case, he was forced to undergo public humiliation. As a result of the fact that many people never saw him again in London, they propagated the idea that he had died from an overdose of drugs when he was alone in his boarding house. They were of the opinion that this would be an appropriate way to punish such a horrible man. On the other hand, fate afforded him a second opportunity to live his life. Immediately following the conclusion of the trial, a young lady by the name of Deirdre McClellan contacted Aleister Crowley. She stated that she was a tremendous fan of his work and that she had read all of his novels. She also expressed her desire to have a kid. Having said that, this amount of admiration is pretty much enough to make the majority of celebrities flee in the opposite direction. But according to Crowley, Alice, he was in such a state of desperation that he settled for going home with a stranger. McClellan assisted him in overcoming his addiction to drugs, and she remained at his side throughout the most difficult stages of his withdrawal process once he had regained his health. Aleister Ataturk was the name of the child that they had together as a couple. Little Aleister was Crowley's pride and joy, and he was a member of the flock. After spending his entire life trying to demonstrate that individuals have to be as self-centered as they possibly can be, he experienced a great deal of sorrow for the manner in which he behaved during his younger years. In the end, he came to the realization that the source of genuine happiness and fulfillment was his family. The three of them spent their summers at the beach, which was located in Cornwall, where they stayed in a house. The information provided by Deirdre McClellan suggests that Aleister Crowley entered a coma in the final moments of his life. When the gods arrived to retrieve his soul, the sky was filled with a clamor of thunder, and the sky lit up. He passed away in 1947, when he was 72 years old. According to The Truth, he passed away as a result of chronic bronchitis, which was made worse by pleurisy and cardiac degeneration. At the Brighton crematorium, where his funeral was placed, there were approximately 12 people in attendance. In addition, excerpts from the Gnostic Massachusetts were read by Lewis Wilkinson. A scandal was caused by the Book of the Law and the fact that it happened to be present at the funeral. The tabloids referred to the funeral as a black mass. Artists and musicians from all over the world began reading Mr. Crowley's work many years after he had passed away, and it motivated them to live their lives in the manner that they desired to live them. Many people, including John Lennon, saw him as a hero and featured him on the cover of SGT. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club. His writings served as the foundation for the free love movement that was popularized by the hippies. The phrase "do what thou wilt" was written on the vinyl record of the album Led Zeppelin III, which was released by Led Zeppelin themselves. David Bowie made a reference to Crowley and the words of his song Quicksand in his performance and lyrics. He made a lot of absurd assertions during his life, but he never made any attempts to shake up the established order of Victorian society. If Aleister Crowley had not been around, it is possible that the world we live in today might not have been the same.